And welcome back, fellow American patriots and Minutemen, standing at the ready to fight anew for the issues that matter on this cold February Thursday. Your host, Daniel Horowitz, back here today at Blaze Media. Make sure you subscribe here at Horowitz Show, our Substack, Liberating Truths. And of all issues that are posing existential threats to our economy, society, humanity, what greater threat than the government induced gaslighting and misallocation of capital to the forms and usage of AI, not all AI, but the forms of generative AI that are rotting out the human brain, supplanting the human experience rather than enhancing it? And I am not here to tell you, oh my gosh, AI is sentient and it's going to do everything that humans can. No, just the opposite. If it could do things so well, we would have greater productivity. It's not that it doesn't have any use, but the way it's unnaturally anti-market, by the way, being greased with corporate welfare and government favors, with unsustainable debt that's going to lead to guaranteed bailouts with a very little ROI, very little profit for the sheer magnitude of investments that dwarf the highways, the railroads, the Apollo missions, you name it. That is the problem here. Things that would not be able to supplant humans without government gaslighting, and it's not giving us the benefits of other technology while saddling us with all the liabilities. How do we think as humans? How do we preserve human thought, the human experience in this era? So we're going to have a very, very special guest coming up in a few moments that I've never had on before, that is writing a book on this. It's about to come out. The Really about this illusion of competence, about the borrowed mind, how to reclaim human thought in the age of AI. And again, as you well know, I am not against AI, nor am I one of those who thinks, oh my gosh, it's going to achieve AGI. I actually think it's not. But I think government is propping it up just enough that it gives this image of illusory efficacy, enough for people to just atrophy and companies to start changing their way of doing things. And then before you know it, we are codifying and normalizing and acculturating a generation to not just its harms, but also incomplete, erroneous efficacy on what it's supposed to do. And we're actually going to wind up going backwards for the first time in human technology. Related to this, before we just bring on John, and I want to get to him very quickly, John Nosta. Everyone's talking about the big news of the day is Pam Bondi's testimony, where she just fought with all the members, including Thomas Massey, and lashed out. And particularly the quote where she said, basically, she doesn't want to talk about Epstein and all that stuff because, well, the stock market is at a record high. And everyone was laughing. So a couple things here. First, as it relates to the AI discussion today, you understand that that means this administration is admitting that they are completely leveraged in asset prices, which tells you that when the market is going to go down, which it, signs are it is, because these companies have unsustainable, unproductive debt without enough promise of profit. So once it starts to go wobble, it's clear this administration will intervene, and that is something we need to watch out for. No too big to fail, no bailouts. So that's just with this discussion. But in general, I've noticed among my friends that it's now fashionable to call for Pam Bondi to resign, and it's terrible. All she cares about is the stock market. Well, all she is doing is mirroring the exact views and expressions of the man himself. So I'm certainly not a fan, never was a fan of Pam Bondi, but she's really just echoing Trump's sentiments, both on Epstein, on priorities, and on everything being the stock market. And somehow that makes the economy good. And and is an excuse for not achieving what they promised on the deep state, on law and order, on immigration, and certainly the economy. So I don't understand why people won't take it up with the man himself, because that's all she is echoing. But anyway, I just had to get that off my shoulders. One other thing is it relates to AI before our interview segment here. So Anthropic made this big announcement. Okay, here's our plan. And it's echoing the Trump administration, echoing Microsoft and OpenAI, that we're going to pay for all of the energy and updated grid needs. And I thought they would have some sort of earth shattering announcement, some sort of innovation, invention. Okay, well, how are you going to do that? Here's the reality. This is a limited hangout to get ahead of an unsustainable political backlash where they're saying, oh, don't worry, we'll pay for it. No cost to you, only benefit. Look, the reality is that the cost is enormous. In some states, they're already taking up double digits in terms of the percentage of the entire power grid. Very soon, they're going to consume, if these are all built, these hyperscales, they're going to consume more power usage than the entire country of Japan. And it's just going to snowball from there. The reality is, if we had technology to upgrade it and pay for it, we would have done that until now, because rates were too high even before the data centers. So why didn't we have all this investment? Now you might say, well, that's because we didn't have a way of paying for it, but now they're going to be so profitable. Well, therein lies the problem. They have such enormous unsustainable debt with no promise of profit, because nobody is finding, or very few people are finding, massive profitability. Chatbots have some use, but nothing of the magnitude of the debt that's being justified in some way that they can pay for something this enormous. So what they are trying to do is a camel's nose under the tent dynamic, where they get their foot in the door, start building this stuff, and now, well, what are you going to do? You're going to pull the plug on it? Well, now government has to come in. That is the plan. Don't sit and gaslight us and tell us that somehow you're going to pay for it, while then saying we need a whole of government approach, Stargate, Manhattan Project. Pick a lane. Is it free market or is it Manhattan Project? Because one is not like the other. The reality is, their technology, as it is currently construed, is not profitable. It's not sustainable. There is no ROI with it. It needs to innovate. It needs to get better. And with government favors, we're actually absolving it of that ability to do so, just like we did with green energy, just like we did with the COVID vaccines. But I want to spend most of the day with a really special guest I'm very excited to bring on. So, folks, as we introduce our next guest, I just want to say from the onset that, as always, as you well know, I am not scared of innovation. I love innovation. Anything that creates efficiencies, while you might have some nostalgic loss of certain capabilities. Well, we don't know how to wash our clothes, really, or most people don't know how to wash their clothes because we have washing machines. But on net, there's a net benefit, and it doesn't atrophy our brains. We've created a lot of innovative tools, but we've never tried to become like the tool, or outsource our humanity to the tool, or wrongly confuse the tool as a human. It's always a means rather than an end. My problem with what I'm seeing from what government, politicians, the industry, the obsessive marketing about it. It's like, you need to do enough. Ask not what the technology could do for you, but what you can do for the technology. You need to sacrifice more power and land. You need to do this. You need to take it more seriously. You need to increase your uptake. And you're seeing all these articles try to gaslight its success, exaggerate it. And then obviously people like OpenAI CEO is going to be the smartest doctor, the smartest lawyer. And like I said, I'm all for robotics, things like that. And the chatbots itself might have some use, but let's not lie to people about what it is, because in doing so, we've now created a generation that's lacking attention, lacking memory, reasoning, verbal comprehension. they're captured by this algorithmic addiction that supplants rather than enhances the human experience. And in the words of our next guest, John Nosta, it's not that we will lose our minds to machines because they're not doing what they promised, but that we might surrender them willingly, one convenience at a time. So, how do we make sure we don't trade speed and convenience and illusory efficacy of tasks for long, deep, enduring success of humanity and just atrophy our brain in general? How do we make AI and steer it to the successes of every other technology we've enjoyed rather than sliding into some sort of dystopia? Our next guest, John Nosta, he's an innovation theorist with a background in science, technology, also medicine a little bit, which I want to get into. And he's the author of a very important book on order. I just ordered it. It will be out in a couple weeks. The Borrowed Mind, Reclaiming Human Thought in the Age of AI. That is exactly what I want to go over today in such little time, so much to cover. John, welcome to Blaze TV for the first time.
It's a great pleasure to be here. I have so much to say. I think that let's cut to the chase here, Daniel. The distance from A to B, from question to answer, is getting shorter and shorter and shorter, to the point where the answer becomes before thought is fully formed. So you know what lives between point A and point B? Imagination.
Wow.
And that is the essence of our humanity, and that is being impinged upon. You know, I don't want to go down the dystopian route. I think that artificial intelligence will impact human cognition, will be extraordinarily transformative. And you know what? The issue is not if AI is bad, but if we as humans are weak, if we as humans are passive in this dynamic. And I want to frame this up by going back a few hundred years, because this is a really interesting time in human history. And we often look at it as the blank revolution, the technological revolution, just something in a series of events. But I think it's a little bit different, a little bit more important. Now, let's go back to Gutenberg. What did Gutenberg do? Gutenberg printed a book. He unlocked words, and that was extraordinarily powerful. Now, here's the sidebar to that discussion. Gutenberg created a technology for which there was no audience. He created a book for people who couldn't read. So that in of itself is kind of interesting. But what he did was unlock words. And that was the first step in our journey of cognitive transformation. What happened next? The internet, probably principally Google, where Google did something that gave us access to facts, but those access to facts were cold. They were transactional. Question, answer, question, answer. And so technology, in the context of the internet, unlocked words, or unlocked facts. Now, here we are with large language models. What's going on there? This is the fundamental transformation. These models, this technology is actually unlocking thought. And they unlock thought in the context of an iterative dynamic. So it's not just question and answer. And I guess that's where we are. I tend to call it the cognitive age, although I feel that's a little bit precarious in terms of language. But that's where we are. However, here's the catch. We've often talked about innovation as a good thing. Your phone no longer works, your washing machine, your car, whatever it may be. We embrace innovation, and what do we do with the old object or thing? We throw it away. In other words, innovation has always had the flip side to the coin, and that's obsolescence. Now, for the first time in history, human cognition itself is on the obsolescence chopping block. That's if we let it happen.
And I think, to pick it up from where your intro was, I'm not sure which article this is from. And by the way, folks, John writes at Psychology Today so many thought-provoking articles. I can't even keep up with them. It's so prolific. And I can tell you, he does more than the people that use AI to put out their slop. And I can tell you, AI could not replicate your writing. There's no way it could. But I don't know which article this is from, but I want to start with this quote. you write that writing externalized memory. Calculators, that was an innovation that externalized arithmetic. Search engines, which you just talked about, externalized retrieval.
Mm-hmm.
AI externalizes structured completion itself.
Yes.
So my concern is that therein lies the difference. Everything else prima facie was a means to an end. My concern is the way the AI is being marketed and presented, and it presents itself as structured completion. It looks very complete and impressive, and it has the answers, and it does it so quickly, but it's not really complete. It makes a lot of mistakes. It's
Yeah.
good for a tool, but that too many people are just like you said. So, I don't need to put together what I did on a Google search before. Use my mind, spend the
Yeah.
time, because I want to trade speed for accuracy.
It's
How do
not
we get
only
around
speed.
that?
It's not only speed. It's efficiency. It's cost. What is the cognitive cost for me, emotionally intellectual, to draft a 5-page article? That's hard work. That's cost. So it's not only efficiency. But I want to take a step back, because I get concerned that we're demonizing AI, that AI, is the devil incarnate. And I think that's a worthy discussion. But I want to go back to Vermeer. I like pulling these crazy examples. Vermeer painted a painting that really defines artistic accomplishment, and that's The Girl with the Pearl Earring. Classic painting. Vermeer used something called the camera obscura to paint that. It was a lens. He focused the image and he traced it. Another famous American artist, Norman Rockwell, used a similar device called a Lucy. And the Lucy was involved in taking a picture, blowing it up, tracing it, and creating that art. Both of those artists, highly accomplished, use technological augmentation in their craft. So again, it's tricky to say, well, it's bad to AI, follow this cognitive path for me. And the interesting thing is Norman Rockwell, when asked about the Lucy, and by the way, that's a bit of a secret, he said, the Lucy is the worst machine that I could imagine, and I'd be lost without it. Are we going down that path? I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but we have to recognize that there's something called the lived experience. We live in a world of time, of experience, of biography. Yesterday informed what happens to us tomorrow.
Continuity of experience.
Continuity of experience is essential here. Now, here's where AI, I believe, is fundamentally antithetical to that. I call it artificial. I don't call it artificial intelligence. I call it anti-intelligence. And people kind of get a little flipped out when I talk about that, because they feel it's sort of a cognitive decline. No, not at all. AI is a complete mathematical, statistical constellation of, and I'm going to use the word stuff here, because it's almost impossible to understand. Now, that doesn't make it a bad thing, but let's go.
But it's different, and you have to know what it is.
Fundamentally different. It's fundamentally different. For example, what does an apple look like to you and me? To you and me, an apple lives in 3 spatial dimensions. Okay? Simple. It has a few linguistic associations, maybe 25 or so. Some of them include apple computer, apple a day keeps the doctor away, apple Garden of Eden, right? A lot of linguistic associations. But when you type in apple into a large language model, it creates a hyperdimensional reality where this thing, this token, if you will, we change words into tokens in large language models, it lives in a hyperdimensional space of 12,288 dimensions. Now that's old, cheapy. The frontier models now actually have 25,000 dimensions in which this thing lives. Now, what is that? The answer is, I don't know, or perhaps more complete, it's beyond my ability to understand it. So large language models and AI is actually transcending human cognition.
Wait, can I just stop you right there?
Sure.
So a lot of the industry people, some of some of those big names,
Oh, I know them
they
all. Yeah.
will use what you just said to express and market to the public that therefore it is much better rather than different,
Yeah.
better than human cognition.
Well, that's, better is a funny word. And let's push on that a little bit, because I think that we try to make AI like humans, or we try to make humans like AI. In other words, it's this mishmash of ambiguity. I don't think that's the case. And I'll use an example of the way we see. The way we see is a function of not one eye, but two, and that's called parallax or parallax vision. We don't appreciate it until we get a patch on our eye and then we lose our ability to see depth. We can't catch a baseball because we don't have the traditional depth perception that our brain constructs from two fields of vision. I think that AI may be better thought about as sort of a cognitive parallax. Because let's face it, we will not understand what 25,000 dimensions is. We struggle with 4 or 5 dimensions with a hypercube. String theory, one of the most advanced concepts in physics, lives in 11 dimensions. That is functionally, we just can't go there. So what I think that is happening here is AI is manifesting this cognitive construct that lives outside of, separate and different from human thought. It's not meant to impinge upon or diminish or even eliminate human thought. We have to celebrate the difference. I sometimes, when I'm driving on the road, I see water trucks that say not fit for human consumption or non-potable water, right? Well, maybe we're seeing the creation or the development of data packets, if you will, these hyperdimensional constructs that are beyond human perception, beyond human comprehension. While this is problematic, it's also recognizing that it is functionally different. It's antithetical to human cognition. And when we think about that, human cognition is low dimension. Our consciousness is a very sort of a low bits and bytes process. It's autobiographical. It has continuity. It has what we call a state. Yesterday is important. Yesterday informs what we know about today. In fact, there's something called slow wave sleep that is a really, really interesting concept. When we sleep, our memories are moved around in our head, and those memories are stored. That's called memory deposition. Those memories are chosen. Our future is what we choose it to be. AI does not have state. It has high dimensional reality.
So I want to, with that, get to your piece. And folks, you got to read it, AI and the Slippery Slope of Frictionless Intelligence. So, again, what people are being taught is one-dimensional thought on this, which is that, oh, okay, to get from point A to point B, it will take you 5 hours to do this. Here, you just press the button and it does it instantaneously. So it's better, and this is what you should get used to. And again, it has its uses. But you're talking about frictionless intelligence, that the trial and error, the struggle, the diffidence, the hesitation that humans go through as they develop things is not a flaw. It is a virtue of how we developed. And then when you have the synthesis without hesitation, the coherence without effort, the confidence without consequence, as you write, it develops problems. Before I get your response, I want to give like an example. I'm a political, I flap my gums for a living and write. Okay, on political issues. And I'm very controversial because I'm kind of on the right, but not traditionally, at least nowadays. Maybe I am traditional, but nowadays the right's not traditional. So I'll toss bombs at anything. So
Sure.
I have this hesitancy in me. I got to really make sure, okay, am I right about that? I'm not going to be confident unless I develop that confidence for a reason. Otherwise, I know there's this friction because, boy, I don't want to step in it here. I don't want to make up a fact and be embarrassed and proven wrong. The LLMs obviously lack that hesitation, that friction.
Yes and no. I think fundamentally you are spot on. That path from A to B, where the magic happens, where life exists, is eliminated. It's dispensed with by the LLM. A couple interesting points here. An LLM does not have original thinking in the way we would understand it. An LLM looks at a prompt as a crossword puzzle to be completed. That's very different. In other words, an LLM does not understand the concept of an answer that may not exist. It is purely computational. Now, it's been said, I think, on probably bumper stickers more than anywhere, right? Happiness is a journey. I think that's a fundamental human truth, that it's not necessarily the destination, but the path that gets us. That's what makes us who we are. We are the sum total of the activity of the path forward. And by getting to the answer without thinking is fundamentally tragic. I don't think it's even it's not a problem. It's not an issue. It's antithetical to the way humans think. It's very important that we understand that. Now, there's a flip side to this. And I think it's important that we recognize this so we kind of have a more complete view. Large language models, with all their flaws and frailty, are extraordinarily good teachers if you allow them to teach, if you question the authority, if you unpack the logic, because large language models in many ways are tuned to the creative frequency of our brains. And in that context, because you like to throw some bombs. So let's throw a bomb. Knowledge is dead. Knowledge is dead. Well, what do I mean by that? In the traditional sense, let's use a wacky example. Let's talk about cooking a souffle. If I want to cook a souffle, remember, I'm not a chef and I don't cook, but if I wanted to cook a souffle, I'd go into the kitchen and find that book on French cooking by Julia Child, The Art of French Cooking. A lot of kitchens have them. They're dust collectors now because they're really hard. So when I open up to page 167 and I start looking how to cook a souffle, that's not my roadmap. That's not my path. That was written for someone else. And the first thing they asked me to make is a sachet. I have no idea what a sachet is. So that path is not appropriate for me as a learner. What language models offer is a way of customizing language so I can have the LLM teach me how to cook a souffle, make it funny, use language of automotive mechanics, and recognize that I've never been in the kitchen before. That hunk of knowledge, that piece of information has never existed before. It unfolds before us. It collapses in real time. So these are some of the things that are important, because what it does, basically, it takes a static map, and that could be anything. It could be how to cook a souffle or how to get from New Jersey to Boston, and it makes it into a dynamic web. And these dynamic webs are very, very powerful. The problem is sometimes they're contrived, sometimes they're not true, and sometimes they're delivered in a way that is just so beautiful, so articulate. It's almost like linguistic theater. Pursuant to the matter at hand, the dynamic relevant to this query suggests that there are two possible paths forward. Whatever, right? Sounds smart. And we know that humans gravitate to that. When a political speech is well delivered, the content is almost irrelevant. Because
and that's what scares me, because it's so illusory. I feel like never have we had something that so much presents itself as a completed product that could complete so many tasks, and often it can. But you talk about the collapse of cognitive cost. It lacks that, and I'm just going to quote from one of your articles here that because everything's about speed. So speed gets mistaken for insight, coherence gets mistaken for truth, confidence becomes contagious precisely because it no longer signals struggle. It's really confident about it. So my concern is that even though AI can do, and I'm making up a number depending on the task, 80% of what we usually do much quicker, much more efficient. But the problem is you often can't trust them with that last 20%. And then even a minute flaw there is a problem, like we saw with Reuters' report on some of the medical devices used in surgery, where it doesn't learn from that trial and error, where its sort of thought process could mistake an anatomy here and there, and then doctors relying on it too much. It's not just that we're atrophying our brain for the long term and outsourcing our intelligence, which is problem A. But problem B is it's not even achieving what people or what sometimes it and its makers market about it.
You know, you hit the nail on the head. These are such important things, because it's not only AI that's making the mistake, but it's also we humans who are making the mistake. So that study you cited was very interesting. That's medical devices, and medical devices using to treat polyps up in your sinuses, up high up in a place in your head that's really close to your brain. So, you know, it's a precarious anatomical location. And what we found is that there were issues emerging from that. I think that that's a complex answer, and I don't want to dissect it. I don't want to talk about adoption sequence and learning curves. We can talk about that another day, but I want to bring attention to something that may be really interesting and relevant to our audience, and that's AI rebound. There's a very interesting dynamic that's emerging here. Let's try to talk about AI rebound. Well, in the context of medicine, this was an actual clinical study. They looked at docs who did colonoscopies, and they had a group of docs who would use AI augmentation, and they found more polyps. And I think that's a perfectly reasonable construct. We see AI as a
backstop.
Tool. It's a backstop. It's kind of like glasses. I mean, look, if I didn't have my glasses, I can't see. That is going to impinge my ability to function as a whatever, pilot, clinician, whomever. But the glasses don't define me. But here's the point. Doctors were better using AI augmentation, because basically AI is a pattern detector. That's what it does. It looks for patterns, linguistic or graphic. But what happens is when they went back to their original non-augmented technology, their quality, their performance fell below baseline. They didn't even get to baseline. It was below baseline. So, for example, when I have a 2008 Audi that I drive. Okay, it's a great car, but it has none of the technological augmentation of our newer cars. The little lights that blink on the mirror when a car is passing. In other words, the technical augmentation makes me a better driver. But when I get in the Audi, I would argue that I'm not as good a driver. You can talk about that with Tesla. If you get used to full self-driving and then you get into a normal car, what happens to your performance?
It goes down. But here's the thing with that. So back to my washing machine thing, and we'll do it to Tesla. So there are certain expertise that we've lost. I mean, a ton of things that we don't do, manual labor, all this stuff.
Sure.
But that's because we've fully supplanted it in a way that it's not necessary. My concern here is, like, getting back to what you said with the doctor, that we are taking away, let's say, someone with a broken leg, you take away the crutch, but you haven't fully healed the leg. You haven't fully created the parallel that could be the end for that, rather than maybe an augmenting tool. That's my concern about a lot of this. And I want to move this along to your discussion about AGI. So you have different camps. Some are like, we're going to have AGI, it's going to do everything for you. And then you'll have on the anti side, which I'm actually not a part of, that oh my gosh, we're going to die, AGI is going to take over. I actually have been feeling the last year or two, I don't think we're going to get it, but I think we're going to be gaslit into giving up our cognitive tools under the assumption that we're going to get it. What are your thoughts on that?
I wonder if AGI is a myth, if it's a target that keeps moving, but is, to your point, is a promotional tool that's leveraged by some of the AI companies, like OpenAI. That's what concerns me. I think that I also wonder if AI or AGI can exist outside of the lived experience, in such that it becomes so artificial and contrived. And AI is very rigid. I just want to fall back to that one comment you said about when you're in the operating room and what happens with doctors. If you put a trick in a prompt, such that you're writing a prompt about political history, and then in the middle of that prompt you write, cats sleep for 18 hours a day, and then you continue with your prompt, the AI has a 300% increase in error. It doesn't know what to do. It has no lived experience. And that's exactly what happens. If you're in an operating room and let's say the lights blink, or for some strange reason, someone bangs on the door, you have the continuity of human experience such that you might look, you might shrug your shoulders, but you carry on. AI struggles with that. It struggles with that continuity of state. So I think that's part of what we're seeing here. AGI is a hypothetical construct that ask 10 people, you'll get 10 different answers. So I think that might be a little bit more problematic than we're willing to admit. It's sexy, right? But I can't give you a real good definition of what it is.
And I noticed a lot of the media, and you know what I mean, some of them, then they have paid ads. They're directly working with the industries. They're actually gaslighting with these scary articles of how it's going to take over, almost echoing a little bit of the concerns of the anti-AI crowd. But in fact, I just feel like it's a straw man. But what we don't want to do is just atrophy our skills under the notion that this is complete. I mean, the reality is, I'm not against it the same way I'm not against the digital software we've created over the last 20 years and Google searches and all this stuff. I use it all the time myself. But at the same time, I won't stop talking about all the harms it's done to this generation and the screen addiction, even before AI and ChatGPT came out. The two things could be true at the same time. My concern here is that I feel like for the first time, it's not just that it's atrophied and caused addiction and caused ancillary problems, but even for the very sphere that it's supposed to enhance and augment and solve, I feel like we're going backwards. So if you could give some thought to, it's not my term, you might remember, I forget who invented the term, who concocted it, but the enshittification of the internet. It really feels, unless I want to see if you agree with me, that the internet and social media is on net for sure, maybe even in a gross proposition, a worse experience now than 7 years ago. It just seems that way to me.
Well, that's a complicated question to say yes or no to.
Sure.
I think that for me, for a skilled user with some sense of human agency driving my actions, it's not. My kids use the internet. We use a LLM to understand math or science or language, and we find it as a very effective tool. And this gets back to to the fundamental premise of the book, right? The borrowed mind, reclaiming our self. AI is an extraordinarily powerful tool. And we often say that, well, it's how you use it. But this is where the rub exists for me. And I think this is what you're touching on to a certain degree. When I use a hammer and bang in a nail, I can put that hammer down and walk away. But can I unthink a thought that I shared with a large language model? It really is a much more complex dynamic that sort of introduces this notion of the cognitive age. So I think that the issue is that we have to establish, understand, and take control of our agency in the presence of these tools that can be rather insidious.
We have to take control. So that's the key difference. I'm old enough that I use the internet, and it hasn't changed with the advent of these LLMs, as if I am in a ocean and I am rowing the boat. I go where I want. I have an agenda. And I go where I want. I feel like for kids, what my concern is, a young generation, that they know nothing but the algorithmic slop. So they're just drifting to where they're taken. So rather than the internet being used as a tool for your cognitive abilities now, that's how it's sort of supplanting it. And that's my question about the thesis of your book. How do we reclaim that human thought with that young generation that don't know the pre-algorithmic internet and social media?
Daniel, before we dump on today's generation, I just want to inform you that 78% of your views on YouTube, of the videos you watch, 78%, and this is about data that's at least 15 years, were those prompted to you and not those that you searched for independently. So the degree to which you've been a free thinker over these years might be a bit more compromised than you even imagine. But I think that's the first step. We have to recognize that we are being manipulated by the machine. And for the first time in human history, because we're looking at cognition as the mediary, let's go back 50 years, go back a lifetime ago. Steve Jobs walked into Xerox PARC in California and he saw something. He saw the graphical user interface. He saw GUI. And he knew immediately that that was going to change the world. He called up Wozniak, and there you have it. There you had the point and click. Today, we're changing. That's been 50 years, but now it's no longer a graphical user interface, but a cognitive user interface where we're leveraging thinking. We can't forget about that. We as humans are oftentimes lazy. We look for the easy way out. Our brains want to do that. We want to find the efficient path. We're rewarded by that efficient path. The problem is the rewards that we're getting today don't align with the true human need.
The rewards we're getting today. So this is the illusory efficacy that I'm concerned about over time. I saw this just yesterday. I'm not sure if I sent this to you. There's a Harvard Business School study that just came out in some of the tech media about AI increasing workload and stress. So they embedded researchers in companies that had voluntary experimenting for about 8 months with, AI and chatbots. And they found, quote, once the excitement of the experimenting fades, workers can find that their workload has quietly grown and feel stretched from juggling everything that's suddenly on their plate. That workload creep can in turn lead to cognitive fatigue, burnout, and weakened decision making. The productivity surge enjoyed at the beginning, which there is, can give way to lower quality work, turnover, and other problems. Is there a concern that some of the short-term boost in efficiency and productivity will actually cause a recession of productivity in the long run if we don't steer this in the right direction?
I think that's really not a surprise. It's human nature. The question is, using the same methodology that's technologically enhanced or empowered is going to give you adverse outcomes. And I think that's what we're seeing here in part. We're also seeing a bit of rebound, that people are bouncing back and forth. People don't use the same methodology in every job or every task they do. For example, if I do search engine optimization, I may be technologically enhanced, but I might not use that same optimization when I write a memo or when I create headlines for an ad. I might. So I think that it's that constellation of ambiguity that causes a high level of frustration. And I also think there's a sense of loss of agency here. What happens when the pie becomes cut into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces, and what's left over for me is trivial, or what's left over for me doesn't drive excitement, enlightenment, but it drives unemployment? So these become difficult. Now, here's my take on that. And we can come back to this issue. I don't think the pie is being cut into smaller and smaller pieces. I think that the pie is expanding. And two examples I'll cite very, very quickly. The first is the camera. When Civil War black and white photos made the day, it didn't destroy portraiture. It grew portraiture. It grew painting. It grew creative expression to the point where we now have this thing called a selfie, which is $1 billion industry. We didn't see it coming. It didn't destroy, it grew the pie bigger. One other example that's very interesting to me is when Boris Spassky played Deep Blue in chess, and the computer won. Was that the end of chess? Did everybody take their pieces and go home? No. Chess has never been more popular today, 20-some years after the computer reigned dominant against a human construct. So the circle of innovation expands. And we have to look at that. We have to look at the circle of innovation in the context of work, of enjoyment, of hobbies, of medicine, of a variety of things, I believe will expand. Of course, there's always the blacksmith, and we can concentrate on the blacksmith if we want, but I think that the circle of expansion is significant, and it's going to transform work and life.
Yeah, I mean, so long as we don't have government monopolizing the public square with special favors to steer capital to the less efficient and productive uses of this, and that's just my concern. Because I'll tell you this much: I don't remember with the iPhone, the tech leaders cycling in and out of the White House. Operation Stargate. We need a Manhattan Project. It just went. It was as nuanced and new as it was. It was natural, and it didn't need sort of a whole of government
Yeah,
gaslighting approach.
I think
I
that's
mean,
a
unless
fair
I'm not
point.
remembering it.
No, I think that's a fair point. But what the iPhone was, at least to me, was a candle. And let me explain that. The
Hmm.
continuous improvement of the candle never got us to the light bulb. So you're looking at what I think is fundamentally incrementalism versus the context of this fundamental shift of the cognitive dynamics of AI. So I think this is probably different and worthy of a different posture. The unfortunate reality is that posture is ill-defined, and it's often driven by social, financial, and political reasons that have their own agenda.
No, exactly. And that's the concern, to sort out the politics from just understanding what it is. A lot of people have trouble understanding even what AI is. What are these chatbots? How do they work? And that's what I think is so important again about this book, The Borrowed Mind, Reclaiming Human Thought in the Age of AI. We can't necessarily affect public policy. We bang our head against the wall with that. But what we can do with our kids, our family, um, to live harmoniously with this, while by understanding what the human mind is, what the AI mind is. To bring this point out, accentuate this point, I want to touch on one other thing
Sure.
that I see discussed and debated a lot: is AI sycophancy. So there's this 2025 study just like a couple months ago by Fanis et al. That tested GPT, Claude, Gemini, a couple of these domains, maybe a few others, and they found that these systems changed their answers nearly 60% of the time when they were challenged by the user. So when
Yes.
they would give a certain answer, and then the user would say, "No, I don't think that's right." They would challenge it. So what they seem to find is that the first draft was always better than what it put out afterwards, subsequent to the feedback. Is that a clue to the fact that this is not really about thinking, but almost plagiarizing existing human thought very well? And then when you throw it a curveball, that's something that's dynamic, it gets a little, it almost seems like it went
Yeah.
backwards with the subsequent answers because it lacked that biographical read, that
You
continuity of human experience to adapt to a challenge.
So much to unpack there, Daniel. I mean, very, 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 very important, interesting thinking. You said backwards. You just threw out the word backwards. I just want to talk about that for a second. Thinking in today's world, in the context of AI and LLM, is in fact backwards. We immediately get to the answer. We start with the answer, and we don't go through the contemplation of thought and struggle and passage to wisdom. Now, you said something interesting. Let's talk about selfies. If you know those apps that will make a caricature of yourself, an avatar of yourself, you put in the picture and it gives you the cartoon version of yourself. Everybody loves them. They're always a little bit better. They're always a little bit thinner. Their smile is a little brighter. They look great because they're designed to please you. That's the nature of this technology. And I think with large language models, they often have that disposition because they want to please you. They want to make you happy. And that is very, very dangerous. When I type in a prompt into an LLM, it comes back, "Oh, John, that's a really interesting idea. Let's explore that." So already, I'm being molded right? I'm being built around this idea. So yes, you have to be afraid of that. I think that's very true. And in the context of large language models, it takes you down the garden path that ties together both its training with your prompting. Now, you got to be careful though. You have to push on it. You have to question it. You have to change gears a little bit. You have to change it up. You have to say, well, I don't know. What about this? Or how's this going to work? So you have to challenge it. That's part of the struggle. Isn't it interesting that what we're doing is thinking? God forbid we actually think
We're
with a large
struggling
language model.
through, like, I love technology. I don't mind AI in
Yeah.
a vacuum, but I'm very concerned about the way it's being deployed, the way it's being marketed, and then therefore some of the distortions that are taking place that I feel like we're actualizing or incurring a lot of the liabilities without necessarily getting some of the benefits that theoretically are being sold to us. And that in itself is, like, for example, one of the things I cannot stand on political Twitter is,
Mhm.
Grok, is this true? It's just,
Yeah.
as if it's the end all. And it's like, you and I'm sure we go through LLMs. I use them here and there. I don't really find it particularly useful for my work, but I'll dabble in it here and there. And sometimes be like, okay, that was helpful. Sometimes, okay, I just ignore it. Like that's just way off the mark. But how do we train our children to use it properly as a way of holding on to human thought and using the LLMs as a tool that is firmly that your brain is firmly in control of it.
Well, I mean, that ultimately is the question of our age, is how do we maintain that sense of human control where the LLM takes us down the garden path? So number one, you can't make the assumption that the LLM is correct. You have to look at it as sometimes teacher. I mean, look, go to college. Do you agree with everything your teacher says? Of course not. So I think that we have to recognize that they're not definitive,
Yep.
but they're contributory to the process. And as long as you maintain a healthy degree of speculation, I think LLMs are very, very powerful tools. It's just when you defer reason and judgment, that's where things start to fall apart.
And with certain things it gets even worse, like with medical mistakes. But that's the thing, you defer your judgment to it, because again, humans, it mirrors humans, because humans are into flattery and sycophancy and
Sure.
the locker room. I always used to call Twitter the political locker room, that
Yeah.
Trump could appoint a judge and nobody ever heard of him. I saw this, I won't mention the name, but this was years ago, and none of my colleagues on the right knew who the guy was. But the first three people, like, oh, this guy's amazing, and they knew nothing about him. And so then everyone else feels the need to do it. So the AIs, I sense they scrape the preponderance of evidence. I want to get your thought on this example. I'm sure you
Mhm.
remember, it was sometime last year where Grok, I think the theory is that there's a ton of foreign intelligence bot operations that out of nowhere just flooded Twitter with, or X, with Jew hatred. So that was
Yeah.
like a real
Yes.
thing. It like came in. So Grok, not surprisingly, started spitting that stuff out. What do we learn from something like that?
Well, we learned that when you drive content through real-time data, it becomes more a function of the popular discussion than it becomes the facts. So we see this also with Reddit. A lot of LLMs will use Reddit, and Reddit has become, some people call it the sewer of engagement, because it's very confrontational, and you find that it kind of builds in that perspective. So yes, again,
Wasn't that the number one source for
I
LLMs?
think it's like 2 or 3. It's
Okay.
one of the top 3, yes. But the interesting thing is that's a double-edged sword, because I do like to have a contemporary sense of what's going on. So we just can't arbitrarily say what the popular discussion today is invalid, or in some way we reject it. Again, that's where we have to use something called judgment.
Judgment. And that's where I want to land the plane on the
Mhm.
thesis of your book. Again, when we talk about reclaiming human thought in the age of AI, what is the most important um guidance and also behavior to be modeled to give over to kids who are growing up with LLMs?
Large language models are not a substitute for thinking. If ultimately you needed a soundbite, I think that would be it. It can help us think, it can augment, it can work with us, it can be a wonderful teacher. But human agency, the lived experience, the sense of identity, the sense of time, the sense of reversibility, what we do has consequences in the future. And finally, that sense of narrative and biography is what humans own. And that's the essence of what being alive is about. AI is anti-intelligence. It's a statistical construct that sounds smart, sounds coherent, but in the final analysis is not the definitive voice.
Exactly. And it's the same thing with physicality. When with the advent of cars, people got fatter and lazier and stopped walking. It had a great use and we wouldn't live without it. But now you got to be cognitive of the fact that, well, you got to exercise more and make up for it. And it's the same thing here. And we just have to navigate, again, some bad actors in the public sphere. This book cannot come out quickly enough. Folks, it's on Amazon or wherever you get your books. It will be out in March, The Borrowed Mind. Make sure you pre-order, pretty cheap price. And also Psychology Today, right? That's where all your articles are.
That's it. Yeah.
Psychology Today, folks. There is just a stream of amazing thoughts on this. I myself, I don't understand this. I'm not into technology. And I think if you don't understand it, you're more prone to fall victim of some of these concerns that we're talking about rather than being able to confidently use it as a tool of augmentation. John, I guarantee you're going to be back here. There's so much
Can't
more to
wait.
discuss. I
Let me
really had a good
let,
time.
let, let
Um,
me let me leave you with this is many thousands years old insightful piece of information. As you think, so you act. As you act, so you become. Let's not defer thinking to the machine, but own it as humans.
Absolutely. That's ultimately where we need to head. John, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate that. And folks, like this is what I'm going to try to do. I'm going to do our regular shows, but I'm also going to try to do specialty shows from now on that, maybe they're not full of action items. We go through data centers and legislation. I'm going to keep doing that, but just understanding what this is, just a practical level. We do it with health, we do it with vaccines, we do it with food, and AI is the same thing. It's to be clear, I'm not against it. It's like saying you're against the computer. It is what it is. It's a tool of what you use it for. But again, my thesis here is that the misallocation of capital that is only being kept afloat by government is pushing a form and usage and prioritization of AI that has much less benefit and much more liability than what a true free market would produce. Hopefully, he's right. He seems to be pretty confident that this will sort itself out because AGI is a fraud. Again, I think there is some gray area where it's not really AGI, but it's being used as AGI and it's making mistakes, but it's just good enough with this illusory efficacy that's going to keep it afloat. And that's something we all need to be cognizant of. So let me know your thoughts, your comments, your questions, concerns. Daniel Horowitz at smartmail.com, or not smartmail, startmail.com. Can't even remember my own email here. Like and subscribe our page, Horowitz Show. Till tomorrow, God bless you all, and thank you for listening.